This week on Vatican Connections, we know when the Conclave will begin, and we look at how the Vatican and the Cardinals are preparing. Hello and welcome to Vatican Connections. We know now that the conclave to elect a new pope will begin on Tuesday, so we're going to look at just what the Vatican and the Cardinals are doing to prepare for that event. First up, Cardinal William Napier sat down with Catholic News Service to tell us about all the different steps that the Cardinals go through before they even get a chance to vote.
First of all, there are these general congregations which have a number of purposes to serve. The one would be simply to get studying and getting clarification on the Constitution. How does the election, how does the conclave how is it conducted? The second one, then, establishing how many of the cardinals are already present. So at what stage can the date for the conclave be decided? The apportioning of the rooms at Santa Marta is also an important one. How many things are done by lot is quite extraordinary. You draw your name out, and that's how you get your room. That's how you get whether you're going to be one of those three that's in the or assistant to the Camerlengo during the period of interregnum. The three of you do the ordinary businesses of the day at the Vatican, keeping the machines turning. So there's all that kind of thing that precedes the actual going into conclave. That what we really needed to do was to exchange views and exchange reports on situations in the different parts of the church, so that when we go into the conclave, we'd have a better idea of the kind of pope we're going to need, or some of the issues that the pope would have to deal with. So the one being elected would already be quite aware of some of the felt needs. I believe that during those congregations we would probably have contributions from some of the outstanding characters that would really get us thinking this is a possible person. And perhaps narrowing down the possibles to probables.
The pre-conclave meetings that Cardinal Napier just spoke about, called General Congregations, began this week. Monday morning was the first session. It began with a prayer, and the Cardinals took an oath of secrecy. This means they can't reveal what's discussed during these meetings. But we do know it's mainly been about logistical issues and a general review of the current state of the Church. The Cardinals met Monday afternoon, Tuesday and Wednesday morning, and all day Thursday and Friday. Every day after the morning meetings, Father Federico Lombardi has been holding a press briefing with the assistance of our very own Father Thomas Rosica and Monsignor Jose Gil Tamayo, who are assisting the press office with English, French, and Spanish language media. Through these briefings, we've learned that the Cardinals sent a message to Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. The Sistine Chapel has been closed to the public and is being prepared for the conclave. Various cardinals have spoken to the college about topics related to the new evangelization, the Second Vatican Council, the relationship between bishops, dioceses, and the Holy See, and the qualities and capacities the next pope should have. We also learned that Pope Emeritus Benedict's fisherman's ring has been destroyed, as have all his papal seals. All of the Cardinal Electors have arrived in Rome. The last one to arrive was Cardinal Jean-Baptiste Min-Man. Now, let's look at just how the Sistine Chapel is being prepared for the conclave. A false floor has to be put in to eliminate steps in the Sistine Chapel and create more usable space. A protective layer is placed over the mosaic floors in preparation for the system of tubes that will support the false floor. Special linens are created for the chapel, and 2 stoves are installed to create that famous smoke that signals to the world whether a pope has been elected. Burning wet or dry hay creates either black or white smoke. But in past conclaves, there wasn't enough smoke to give the world a clear sign. These 2 stoves fix that problem. At the feet of Michelangelo's fresco of the Last Judgment, a table will be set up with the urns into which the cardinals will place their ballots. Of course, tables and chairs will be set up for the cardinals as well. Before any official business begins, the Vatican police will do a sweep of the chapel for any recording devices to ensure total privacy for the Cardinal Electors. There is an elaborate ritual connected to the actual voting process. Cardinal Electors don't just stand up and walk and put their ballots in any old box. Vatican television has more.
The 3 urns that will be used for voting during the conclave to elect the next pope are ready. 1 for votes, 1 for ballots after they have been counted, and 1 for cardinals impeded by illness from leaving their rooms in Sancta Marta. The urns in modern style were commissioned during the pontificate of John Paul II and were already used in the 2005 conclave, during which Joseph Ratzinger was elected pope.
So we know how the physical places are being prepared for the conclave, but that's not all that needs preparation. The cardinals also need to prepare themselves for the task at hand. A special prayer gathering was arranged by the cardinals on Wednesday evening at the altar of the chair in St. Peter's Basilica. Cardinal Angelo Comastri led the service, which began with the glorious mysteries of the Rosary, Eucharistic adoration, and the evening vespers for the day. Now, there was no homily or meditation, just a brief reading from the breviary and time for personal silent prayer. And a big part of the preparations is looking carefully at what the Church today is, figuring out what the challenges are and what needs to be done to overcome those challenges. While the cardinals can't discuss the specifics of what goes on in the general congregations, they can share their views on the current state of the Church and the world. First up, Cardinal Oscar Maradiaga of Honduras sizes up the challenges facing the Church today.
I believe the Church is not a social institution only. We are a transcendent institution, a divine institution, a spiritual institution, not only, of course, as the Vatican II says, we are natural and supernatural. We are immanent and transcendent. We are human and divine. Okay. It means that the main problem of the Church is how to announce the message of God. How can God be taken in consideration in a human life that many times is secularized and excluding God from the history and from the existence of the world? This is the main problem. The others go after. But when there is no God, how can you preach ethical principles if, as Benedict XVI said, relativism is prevailing in some cultures? It means individualism, that they said, for me this is good, for me this is bad. This is not the way the human race has been growing, because we are not only individuals, we are community. And so it's necessary to, first of all, to question about this. Then the evangelization, because the Church exists to evangelize. This is the main purpose of Christ when he said, I will start my church. And the last word he told us was, go all around the world and announce the good news. Do not forget that we are not only thinking about economic problems such as the world of today, that wherever you go they would say we are in an economic crisis and there is no money, there are no jobs. Okay, these are other problems, but the main problems of the Church are those which I said.
Cardinal James Stafford spoke to CNS about secularism and why the next Pope will have a very difficult task dealing with it.
Secularization is something that is as I've discovered here in Rome, is something that is viral worldwide. It is not simply focused on the West, that is Western Europe and North America. In various stages, it is everywhere, even in the midst of the depths of the Amazon. How does the Church respond to that? Thus far, we have not found an effective response, pastoral response to it, theological response. In some ways, the Church in the United States, and I would say the Church in Europe, is intellectually less well armed to respond to it. It is less capable of responding to a cultural crisis of immense magnitude than it would have been, say, in the 50s. What is the secularized person? What characterizes that person? And the best definition I've heard, or the definition that best suits the services of my concern about pastoral care of the people, pastoral ministry to God's people in the Church, is it represents the disinherited mind. The person who is disinherited. For the most part, we, and I think especially the younger generation, is disinherited from its past. We have been the younger generation and all of Western culture is in the process of being disinherited from God and from the communities that have been established by Christ to speak of forgiveness. And thus we have been disinherited from forgiveness. We're now in the process of being disinherited from family and marriage and from children. We've been disinherited from the sacramental, poetic imagination that was an integral part of the Catholic Church in its liturgy, and symbol, sign, sacrament of God's love for all of humanity. God, who is bridegroom, and humanity, who is the bride. Those are the issues that he's going to have to face. The Roman Curia is going to have to face. And first of all, diagnose more clearly what's at the base of the challenges that are facing disciples today. To diagnose what is the virus that's affecting him. What is this secularization?
The biggest blight the Church has had to deal with is the issue of sexual abuse by priests. While leaps and bounds have been made in recent years, the progress is not uniform across the Church. And during a briefing at the North American College, Cardinal Francis George of Chicago answered questions about what still needs to be done.
He obviously has to accept the universal code of the Church now, which is zero tolerance for anyone who has ever abused a minor child, and therefore may not remain in public ministry in the Church. We have victims now of sexual abuse, and they're not just victims of sexual abuse by teachers or politicians or even fathers or uncles. They've been abused by a Catholic priest, and sometimes by a Catholic bishop, and sometimes the abuse has been not addressed as it should have been by Catholic bishops. That is a terrible wound on the body of the Church. And it has to be looked at. I think that when we came over here, a small delegation after we passed the charter, I wanted to put it into the Code of Canon Law because the Code of Canon Law didn't provide for permanent dismissal from the priesthood because of this delict, this crime. There were reasons why it didn't. We came and said there must be zero tolerance. It took a while to introduce those norms, first of all for us in the United States, and now those norms are universal for the whole Church. So whoever's elected Pope, he governs by law. We all do, not by whim or desire on our part. So we're governed by law in all particulars.
Usually in this segment we feature resignations and nominations, but because we're in sede vacante and there is no pope, there can be no nominations and resignations. So instead, we're going to take a look at the faces that you'll be seeing throughout the interregnum and on the balcony when we have a new pope. Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone is the Camerlengo or Chamberlain of the Church. Now, while there is no pope, he takes care of the day-to-day running of the Vatican. He also makes sure that everything is ready for the conclave, and during the conclave, he keeps an eye out for any recording devices that might have found their way into the Sistine Chapel. Next up, Cardinal Angelo Sodano is the Cardinal Dean of the College of Cardinals. His job is to run the General Congregation meetings and preside over the Mass that opens the conclave. However, since Cardinal Sodano is over 80, he cannot vote and he cannot enter the conclave. French Cardinal Jean-Louis Tauran has a very important role in the conclave. He is the senior deacon of the College of Cardinals, and as such, he has the job of announcing to the world who the next pope is. One non-cardinal has a key role in the interregnum, and that is Monsignor Guido Marini. He is the master of ceremonies of papal liturgies. He makes sure that all the liturgical aspects of the interregnum and conclave go off well. We saw him Wednesday when he led the cardinals in the rosary at the altar of the chair of St. Peter, and he will hand out the ballots for the cardinals to use in their voting and help the new pope vest once he's elected. Now this week, many of you had questions about what happens during the interregnum and what happens to Benedict XVI. Monica George sent us a question via email. She asked, "Is the Pope Emeritus taking visitors?" Well, sorry to say, Monica, but Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI isn't taking visitors, but he is receiving letters and emails from people around the world. And that didn't stop a team of Italian paparazzi from sneaking around the gardens at Castel Gandolfo to snap a photo of Pope Emeritus Benedict and his personal secretary, Archbishop Georg Ganswein, walking in the gardens reciting the Rosary. Dahi McLaughlin asked, how do the cardinals get their meals, and what if one of them takes ill? Is a doctor locked into the conclave with them? Well, that's a very good question too, Dahi. It was Gregory X who started the practice of having cardinals withdraw into seclusion to select the next pope. The cardinals were allowed to have up to 2 attendants who would pass the cardinals their meals through a small window in their cells or at the entrance to the palace where the conclave was being held. The amount of food would be reduced the longer the conclave dragged on. Rules changed over time, but it was Pope John Paul II who decreed that conclaves should take place in the Sistine Chapel. He also ordered the construction of the Domus Sancta Marta, a residence in Vatican City where all the Cardinal Electors would be housed during a conclave. Now, kitchen staff does work in the Sancta Marta and provides the cardinals with meals. However, those staff members are also sworn to keep secret anything they might find out about the conclave as a result of being around the cardinals. Now, as for what happens with any cardinals who might be sick or just elderly and frail, they are allowed to have a nurse with them in the conclave. That nurse also takes the oath of secrecy, and there are 2 doctors on standby should any medical emergencies come up, and again, they also have been sworn to keep secret whatever they learn about conclave proceedings. Should a Cardinal Elector be unable to leave his bed at the Sancta Marta, 2 specially appointed cardinals would have the job of taking a special urn to the cardinal's bedside so that he can cast his vote. Christiane Fex asked, what does the cardinal schedule look like and who sets it? So, before the doors of the Sistine Chapel are locked, the cardinals themselves set their schedule. They meet in the general congregations and they decide when and how often they want to meet. They also decide what day to begin the conclave. Once all of that is decided, though, there are some very specific rules set out about what happens. So before balloting can begin, the cardinals must celebrate a special mass for the election of a pope. Once they've changed out of their mass vestments and into their choir vestments, they go to the Pauline Chapel in the Apostolic Palace, and from there, they process into the Sistine Chapel, chanting the Veni Creator Spiritus. Then they have to vote on 3 people who will serve as scrutineers. They have to hear a final meditation from a preacher, and then they can finally begin voting. Now, on the first day of the conclave, or the day of the Mass, they're only allowed to vote once. On the following days, they can hold 2 votes in the morning and 2 votes in the afternoon. If after 3 days of voting there is no pope, then they take a 1-day break for prayer and reflection, and they start again for another 3 days. And once a cardinal receives 2/3 of the votes, all voting stops. They burn the ballots in the specially installed stoves and pay their respects to the new pope. The new pope is then taken to the sacristy of the Sistine Chapel, where he removes his black cassock and puts on the white papal cassock. Give or take an hour goes by between the time the smoke rises from the Sistine Chapel and the new pope appears on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. Vatican Connections is interactive. Send us your questions or comments by Facebook, Twitter, email, or post. Via email, send comments to info@saltandlighttv.org, and by post, send letters to 114 Richmond Street East, Toronto, Ontario, M5C 1P1, Canada. This week, our Roman profile takes a look at the relationship between Romans and the Pope.
The fact that the Italians have pretty much had a monopoly on the papacy up until very recently has made the Pope really the king of Rome. I mean, you know, the Pope as an historical figure has worn many hats, you know, so to speak. And one of them is that he was the absolute monarch of the city until very recently, or relatively recently, until 1870. So, of course, the Romans always had to deal with the Pope in a much more direct and a much more personal, immediate, everyday way than any other people. And so the Pope has always been a figure that the Romans have watched and been interested in and needed to know who he was and what he was about. The Romans, being a people who are particular to the city, I think they take the Pope on a case-by-case basis, in the sense that I think that the Romans are cynical enough not to have invested so much in the office as much as they are invested or not in the person. And so I think that the relationship between the Romans and the Pope has depended upon who the Pope is and how he appears to these people. And so I think that in the case of the last 2 popes, John Paul II and Benedict, I think that the Romans were not as attached to them as they had been to Italian popes. They were more interested. I don't think they could relate to these 2 men as maybe the rest of the Catholic world did and had a better time doing. And so I think that they're waiting to see whether the Church will go back to the tradition of picking an Italian as the Pope, or continue with a European, or maybe even go beyond Europe to the rest of the world.
Well, as you know, things went crazy at the Vatican on Friday afternoon when journalists received text messages from Father Federico Lombardi telling them that a date for the conclave had been set. And we know now that that date is Tuesday, March 12th. Now, from Tuesday onwards, Salt and Light will be your source of information about what's going on in Rome. You can follow us on Twitter, on our website, or of course, by tuning into our network for all the latest updates. Now, for everyone here, I'm Alicia Ambrosio saying thank you for watching.